Hi viewers, today we have Dr. Tilak Jha. He is an expert in China. What do you think? Like, what is India for China? Let's start with that.
Well, India, for that matter, I think if you see the power equation, that is what defines India's status in the Chinese perception. By the way, I think we can divide it into two sets of perceptions that the Chinese have. One is, of course, the official version that the government says, and they treat India as a South Asian power. They treat us as a regional power, not as a world power, definitely. And that is deliberate as well. This is not that they don't realize that India is a major country and it is going to remain so, and in the coming years it will become far more powerful and it will be one of the top economies and one of the major powers. They do realize that, and because of this there is a deliberate stance, for that matter, to sort of cut India to size as a regional power and keep it limited in a South Asian theater. So that is a political thing. If you see the public perception, that among the common people, how they view Indians, I think that's different. There is a mixed sort of thing there. The young generation, they are enamored about Bangalore and Hyderabad. If you ask a young Chinese, they definitely know about Bangalore, not about Mumbai maybe, but Bangalore is something that's on the top of their mind, the young generation. At the same time, I think many Chinese who come to India, they find India to be sort of a country where um, there is poverty, there is, I think, all sorts of domestic issues, basic issues, fundamental issues. So those negative perceptions are also there among the young generation. But if you ask this older generation Chinese, people who are 50s, 60s, 70s, they have a very, very different and very positive perception of India. And that's guided by India's legacy of Buddhism. So they are very, very fond of India. They consider India to be a country which showed path to the Chinese nation and continues to do so through Buddhism. So I think we can divide it into two parts: government and public. And in the public, we have two sets of it. Of course, there are many nuances in between. There are many levels of these perceptions. In the government, also you have competing agendas and factions and people who see India differently. So it's not a monolithic sort of thing. But overall, we can say that these are the primary shades, and there are primary divisions, and there are shades in between.
Okay, so while reporting for, say, BBC as a China specialist, what was your experience? Like it is, I mean, like something very, very sophisticated in that sense. You have some experiences on that.
Yeah, the BBC, for that matter, all the Western agency in particular, they have a they are also respected for the kind of reporting that they do. At the same time, when it comes to, again, the government dealing with them, they keep a very, very tight watch on them. So, for example, if you ask me, the BBC Beijing bureau, it's very, very tightly controlled, extremely tightly controlled in terms of who comes, who goes, where they go. Lot of de facto surveillance and unofficials. Technically, they will never say that they are watching you, but they are consistently sort of looking for journalists who sort of report. And then I think the issue is that it has been increasing over the past decade, especially since current President Xi Jinping came to power. So we do see a rising tendency in China towards sort of curbs on foreign media in general, but Western media in particular, and BBC and CNN and all these Western news agencies in particular, because they often post negative coverage of China about stories in Xinjiang, which they don't like at all. So reporting in China, for that matter, is always a challenge. It's very, very difficult assignment often. At the same time, it's also an opportunity, because it's a huge opportunity to be able to report as a work as a journalist in China, because that gives you the kind of first-hand impression of what it actually means to have a government which doesn't really believe in the kind of journalism that we do in general.
Okay. You have experiences in like China's annual parliament session reporting that and Sino-US trade war. So can you explain more about how was it? And
Well, it's very different in the sense that if you ask about the China's annual parliament session, that's primarily not a representative body as we see it in a democracy. In a democracy, these are very dynamic institutions which have real power, and they decide, they actually decide. But in case of China, the parliament is primarily it's rightly called a rubber stamp, and so most of the decisions are actually taken by the top leadership, by the CPC, Communist Party of China's, top bodies. So essentially, it's the top-down model, and the parliament session is often a session in which people from different so-called representatives, for that matter, who are often appointed for that matter, nominated by the party. So they come often dressed in their local colors. So people from Xinjiang and Tibet will come in their local dresses, and they would sort of, it's a showcase thing rather than a real democratic thing. So it's a very different, for that matter. Even that coverage is sort of very restricted. Talking to people who come from these regions, representatives who come, they are, again, they will not say much to you. They're used to self-censoring themselves, and it's also true for common people in China, most of them, until unless they are not really into it, they really don't have very strong sentiments, they don't come forth. So very basic issues. So I think if you go to the annual parliament session, they will have press releases. It looks very organized, by the way, these five-star hotel kind of facilities where everything is in order. But technically, if you see it from a journalist point of view, there is hardly anything in order. So it's a very glossy on the face of it. It's very attractive on the face of it, but there's no real journalism as such. And I think that is there. Sino-US trade war, as far as that is of course a power game. Right? It was never about technology. It was never about trade per se. America, for that matter, has been buying less from China, buying more from China, and exporting less to China for 40 years almost, for as long as we can remember. Also because they happen to be the biggest consumer of the world, and they didn't really care about Chinese exports until they exported shocks and bags and these cheap goods. Now the problem is that the Americans realize that they have started ramping up their 5G exports and these high-tech exports. That's where the global supremacy of the Western nations comes in question. And I think that is where the issues, they realize that if they just keep giving the Chinese leeway, well, they will be turned upside down. So I think that is where the issue is, a power game, and covering that thing as well has been a very very memorable experience. For that matter, I'll tell you what, the Chinese have been are very very tough negotiator when it comes to that. So they have tried all the tricks, but I think the Americans, once they have realized that, well, it's actually about getting on the neck of their global status. So, which is where I think the rapprochement is not happening. But in the long run, if you ask me, where is it going? It's very difficult to say that. Well, the Chinese economy is under pressure. I think we have seen, especially during COVID as well, the Chinese economy remains one of the top, the fastest growing economy. It has continued to grow. The gap is increasing, and that is where the advantages are gradually shifting in favor of China. So it's a consistent trend which is strengthening, and it has gained significant momentum, especially given the fact that the Chinese economy is a almost 13-14 trillion economy. So they are catching up very, very fast. And with the kind of AI investment in artificial intelligence that they are making, I think it's going to be a very, very tough game. We just hope that, for that matter, India rises to the occasion. I think we have to play a very, very crucial role in balancing this realignment of power equations across the world.
Okay. So, how was your stint at Shanghai Daily? Because it's totally different than what you've been doing. I mean, like in BBC, it's that particular place, and there you need to work. So, how was it?
Well, Shanghai Daily it has a Chinese version and an English version. I think that's true for that matter with most Chinese newspaper. The Global Times that we read in India with so much of excitement. The English version hardly anybody reads in China. Also because Chinese is the mainstream language. So the Chinese version of the Global Times is actually the mainstream newspaper. It's fairly popular, by the way. It's known for attacking India, India in particular. When it comes to Shanghai Daily, again, it's a major newspaper of the Shanghai city. Shanghai has a history of supporting and journalism, which was relatively less stringent from Beijing, but again in recent years it sort of these realignments keep changing. Sometimes there is less restriction on Beijing media than Shanghai media. So it's a city specific thing as well. But I think there is definitely a bit of journalism, but primarily, if you ask me, that is a hardcore journalism. That's not the case. So I think if you ask, for that matter, any foreigner who works in these Shanghai Daily, I think there are a couple of others as well who still work in Shanghai Daily. Some of my friends, still Indian friends, who are working in Shanghai Daily. So they usually have a very limited role. I think they rarely get reporting assignment persons. Their role is related to editing and the English version in general. Of course, at times there are debates and discussions, and they do allow foreigners some leeway in terms of proposing and doing stories. But those are far and few, and nothing compared to an Indian or a Western news agency. But otherwise, if you again the same thing, if you ask me that, well, in terms of work environment, in terms of infrastructure, in terms of on the face of it, the looks on it, well, Shanghai Delhi has a fantastic office. It's on 21st floor. You can see the whole of Shanghai from their windows. So those things are there, I think. Yeah. But I think ultimately, as a journalist, you feel that, well, it has its limitations. It doesn't really satisfy you beyond a point of time, and that is where I think you have to choose. And well, it's difficult to become a journalist, to be very honest.
Okay. So, what do you think about the current Afghan issues and how China is dealing with it?
Well, the Chinese, for that matter, happens to be, at least from the current in the current scheme of things, we can say that they are the winner de facto, because they have got the Americans out, which they wanted for several years, and they have Pakistan on their side. At least they know how to deal with Pakistan. That's at least this history shows for the past 60, 70 years that they have been dealing with them. But I think the Chinese, for that matter, are not going to have an easy task negotiating with Afghanistan. Also uh, because it's very difficult to. We have already seen Afghanistan, for that matter, and the Taliban. What they promised a month ago, things have started changing. Whether it be about women's right, whether it be about freedoms, whether it be about pardoning the opposition leaders and former military people. So all these contradictions are going to remain. The Chinese are also very, very conscious about their global image. So they do realize that if they go all out to support the Afghanistan and the Taliban, and if things go the other way around, then they will be the only to blame. So they don't want the blame, but they definitely want to have the benefits of it. So I think Chinese will find very, very difficult to negotiate with Taliban, for that matter, because they do not happen to be rationally running their country. At least the current evidence doesn't suggest that. At the same time, they also have a problem in their Xinjiang, which is a northwestern province, and they have their own ethnic minority related problems. They have had unrest there. They have suppressed them, and I think this has been widely globally reported. And there's real suppression. We cannot even imagine the kind of surveillance that they have put in Xinjiang. So they have this Xinjiang issue as well. I think the border that China has with Afghanistan is actually Xinjiang has with Afghanistan. So the moment they sort of try to open it up, I think they are not going to have all that they want and the way they want it. So I think that interaction is anyway, by all count, going to remain very, very restrained, and the Chinese will find it very difficult to sort of come all going all guns and shots in Afghanistan. So we'll have to wait before for at least a couple of years before we see the Chinese role. And for that matter, even otherwise, if we see how the Chinese have played out in other countries, they have made risky investments in countries run by dictators and countries run which have not been democratic for that matter, but still they do it very, very carefully, and they make sure that the returns, the investments that they do, they don't make a loss on that. So I think the Chinese are not sure for, I think for that matter nobody is sure that if engagement with Taliban led Afghanistan, where is it going. So I think they're waiting, they will bide time, but I think they're also giving them some political support so that once the sun rises and the grass turns greener, they will be on the brighter side.
Okay, so in this scenario, what do you think India-China relationship will turn to in that sense? Like,
It's far more complicated. We have had several issues, and the issues seems to be unending. It is actually going on northward trajectory. The key factor that why India and China are not having a good relation and will possibly continue to have frictions in the coming years as well is the very definitive thinking in the Chinese scheme of things, Chinese geopolitics, that India needs to be cut to size. They do not want India to rise. And the one major factor is that if you ask for that matter, they do realize that 30 years from now, the one country which can actually rise against China, rise up to China, it could be India. They do realize that it's going to happen someday. They can, but they want to delay it as long as they can. They want to engage and keep India busy with Pakistan and Nepal and all these issues. I think India-China relations, if you see the issues, we have border issues, which again, I think the settlement is not happening because the Chinese are not exchanging maps. The Chinese are reluctant to sort of taking it forward. That is there. They want it absolutely on their own terms, which again could have happened. Possibly some negotiation, give and take, could have happened. But their stance on Kashmir, their relationship with Pakistan, and the Galwan incident which happened last year, all these things signal towards the fact that they continue to want they continue to want keep the pot boiling. And if you see this China-Pakistan economic corridor, which happens with the flagship corridor, flagship project of the Belt and Road, One Belt, One Road, they have renamed it Belt and Road Initiative, but it's de facto One Belt, One Road still. So all these issues are there. And of course, there are trade imbalances. I think India exports far less than it imports from China. So I think those significant trade issues are there as well. So we have trade issues, we have military issues, we have border issues, we have geopolitical conflicts, geopolitical divergences. We do agree on certain things, maybe related to agriculture and climate, or for that matter, maybe when it comes to dealing with Western nations on certain issues. But I think the divergence appear to be far more prominent as of now. It's actually the onus lies in Chinese. And for that matter, by the way, I don't see it happening going in a positive direction, at least under the current president. Well, if the rule changes, if a very dramatic development happens in Pakistan or Afghanistan, then I think they will have a fundamental rethink. By the way, let me also add at this point that the Chinese are very, very careful. They will not push India too far. While they do understand that they have to keep India under limits, they also do realize that they if they push India too far, then I think it's going to backfire. So they do realize that thing, which is where I think if you see even in 1962 for that matter, they came inside and they pulled back after that, even if under the pressure of the US saying that they will be sending the seventh, Russia says, saying that they will be sending they're sending their fleet, navy. So all these things are complicated. So from it's not just a recent development. They do realize that India is a prominent country, and any issue, India will not forget easily. We haven't forgotten 1962. We haven't forgotten any of the wars. Nobody should, for that matter. So they don't really are inclined to push India too far, but they are definitely not willing to give a leeway to India to rise and a sharp. And you see their stance on the nuclear suppliers. You see their stance on the India's demand for membership in the UN Security Council. China happens to be the lone dissenter. And by the way, if the power disparity keeps on growing, I think the Chinese will become more and more assertive. So I think if you see till the 1990s, they never opposed. They said nothing about the nuclear UN Security Council membership and all these things. Actually, even for that matter, they more or less even supported it. But over the years, they are ready to risk even being the lone dissenter. This is a very important change in the Chinese stance. Earlier, they were willing to go with the rest of the world, but now they are willing to, with the rise in their gap in power between India and China, they're willing to, put their neck and just say that, well, we'll not allow it, that kind of thing. So we'll have to be careful that the power disparity, especially the economic disparity between India and China, remains limited. If it keeps on increasing, we'll see much more assertive Chinese stance. And I think no amount of nuclear weapons, for that matter, is going to be the deciding factor, because we are not going to have a nuclear war per se. For that matter, I think Indian and Chinese leadership both do realize they have that much sensitivity for sure that they will never go to the extent of using nuclear weapons against each other. But at the same time, I think conventional battles and exchanges and fights that we are having on the border, it's enough to keep the pot boiling. And I think that is where the Chinese objectives are. So we have to be careful about all these things and not make sure that we put our own house in order. If we are able to keep doing that, I think we'll be able to take care of the Chinese very well.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Tilak Jha, being with us for this wonderful talk. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sajjan. It's a privilege.